The explosion sent my soup ladle flying across the mess tent as the ground shook beneath my feet. I dove behind the prep counter, my chef's whites already stained with today's special beef stew that now decorated the canvas walls in abstract patterns. The artillery shell had landed close enough to rattle every pot and pan in my kitchen, but far enough away that I was still breathing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Elena Reyes, and for the past 8 months, I'd been the head cook at Forward Operating Base Sentinel, a dusty outpost in the mountains of Eastern Europe where diplomacy had failed and bullets did the talking. To everyone here, I was just the cook, the woman who made sure hot meals appeared 3 times a day, who kept the coffee strong and the complaints about army rations to a minimum. I was invisible in the way that support personnel always are in military operations, essential, but overlooked, necessary but not noteworthy. What they didn't know was that before I'd traded my combat boots for kitchen clogs, I'd spent 6 years as a Marine reconnaissance specialist. Before I'd learned to braise short ribs and fold perfect dumplings, I'd learned to move through enemy territory without making a sound, to kill silently with whatever weapon was available, and to survive when everything went wrong. But that was another life, when I'd left behind after Kandahar, after the IED that took my squad and left me with scars that ran deeper than the shrapnel marks on my left shoulder. Cooking had become my therapy, my way of creating instead of destroying. There was something pure about transforming raw ingredients into nourishment, about feeding people instead of fighting them. The kitchen was my sanctuary, the one place where my hands could work without trembling, where the nightmares couldn't reach me. At least, that's what I'd thought until this morning. The radio crackled to life as I pulled myself up from behind the counter. All stations, this is Base Command. We have confirmed hostile forces, approximately 2 clicks north and advancing. All non-essential personnel to secure positions immediately. Non-essential. That stung more than it should have. I'd spent the morning preparing lunch for 300 soldiers, had gotten up at 0400 to start the bread that would accompany tonight's dinner, had personally checked every ingredient to make sure my people were getting the nutrition they needed to stay sharp in combat. But when the shooting started, I was non-essential. I was securing the propane lines when Private Morrison burst through the tent flaps, his face pale and his hands shaking. He was barely 19, a kid from Nebraska who'd enlisted because college was too expensive and factory work was too soul-crushing. I'd watched him grow from a homesick boy into something resembling a soldier over the past few months, mainly by making sure he always got extra portions and listening when he needed to talk about the girl back home. "Elena, you need to get to the bunker now," he gasped, trying to catch his breath. "Intelligence says they're targeting support facilities first. Kitchens, medical, communications. They want to break our ability to sustain operations." I felt something cold settle in my stomach that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with recognition. This wasn't random violence or even strategic bombing. This was systematic, designed to destroy morale by eliminating the things that made military life bearable. Someone understood that an army marches on its stomach, and they were planning to starve us out. "How many hostiles?" I asked, already calculating distances and defensive positions in my head, falling back into patterns of thought I'd spent 2 years trying to forget. "Intelligence estimates 40 to 50, but they're moving in small teams. Coordinated assault on multiple targets." Morrison paused, looking around the kitchen that had become his second home. "Elena, they're not taking prisoners. The intel is solid. They've been systematically eliminating support personnel at other bases. They see cooks and medics as soft targets." Soft targets. The phrase hit me like a physical blow, not because it scared me, but because it made me angry in a way I hadn't felt since Afghanistan. These soldiers thought they could walk into my kitchen, into the place where I fed and cared for my people, and treat us like helpless victims. They thought being a cook made me weak, made me an easy kill. They were about to learn how wrong they could be. I moved to the knife rack, my hand steady for the first time in months as I selected my tools. 8-inch chef's knife, balanced and sharp enough to slice through bone. 6-inch boning knife, perfect for close work. 4-inch paring knife, small enough to conceal. Each blade had been honed to razor sharpness because I took pride in my craft, because precision mattered whether you were deboning a chicken or defending your life. "Elena, what are you doing?" Morrison's voice cracked with worry. "You need to get to the bunker." I tested the edge of the chef's knife against my thumb, drawing a thin line of blood that beaded bright red against my skin. The steel sang with the kind of sharpness that could separate muscle from bone with surgical precision. "Morrison, how many people are in the medical bunker? Maybe 30? Medics wounded, some of the admin staff. And the communications bunker?" "Another 20, plus all our radio equipment." I nodded, doing the math. 50 people crammed into confined spaces, completely dependent on others for their security. Sitting ducks if the defensive perimeter failed. And from the sound of gunfire getting closer, that perimeter was already under pressure. "I need you to get to command and tell them that Corporal Elena Reyes is implementing emergency kitchen defense protocols," I said, sliding the knives into the pockets of my chef's coat. "Tell them the mess facility will remain operational." Morrison stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "Elena, you're a cook. There are trained soldiers out there fighting a war. You can't defend this place with kitchen utensils." I looked at him, this boy who'd never seen me as anything but the woman who made sure his favorite dessert appeared on Sundays, who listened to his stories about home, who'd slowly helped him build confidence through small acts of care and attention. He couldn't imagine that the same hands that kneaded bread could also kill, that the precision I used to butterfly a pork tenderloin could be applied to human anatomy with lethal effect. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Morrison, I need you to trust me and do exactly what I'm telling you. Get to command, deliver my message, and then get yourself somewhere safe." I moved toward the tent entrance, pausing to grab a handful of salt from the prep station. Salt. In the eyes would buy me precious seconds in close combat. "And Morrison?" "Yeah?" "Tell them that dinner will be served at 1800 hours as scheduled. I'm making lamb stew tonight, and I'll be damned if a few uninvited guests are going to ruin my menu." The first explosion outside was close enough to shake dust from the tent poles. Through the canvas, I could hear the distinctive crack of AK-47s, mixed with the deeper bark of American M4s. The battle was coming to us whether we wanted it or not, and I'd spent too many years running from fights that found me anyway. I slipped out the back of the mess tent, moving with the fluid silence that had once made me one of the best reconnaissance Marines in my unit. The kitchen might have softened my edges, might have given me a different kind of purpose, but muscle memory was eternal. My body remembered how to become invisible, how to read terrain and shadows, how to move like death itself through enemy territory. The first hostile soldier I encountered was crouched behind the generator shed, approximately 50 meters from the mess tent. He was young, maybe mid-20s, wearing mismatched camouflage and carrying an assault rifle with the casual confidence of someone who'd never expected serious resistance from support personnel. He was probably tasked with securing the kitchen area while his teammates hit higher priority targets. I circled wide, using the shadow of the supply containers to mask my approach. The chef's knife felt perfectly balanced in my right hand, its familiar weight as comfortable as the wooden spoon I used to stir soup. I'd spent countless hours with this blade, had learned its balance and temperament through thousands of cuts, had developed the kind of intimate relationship with the tool that only came from daily use. The soldier never saw me coming. I moved Up behind him with the same silent efficiency I used to fillet fish, the blade finding the gap between his helmet and body armor with surgical precision. He dropped without a sound, his weapon clattering against the metal shed. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no remorse, no adrenaline rush. Just the cold, professional detachment that had once made me effective in combat and now made me efficient in the kitchen. This was simply another task that required precision and technique, another problem that needed solving with the right application of force. The second soldier was positioned near the communications bunker, exactly where Morrison had said the most vulnerable personnel were sheltering. This one was older, more experienced, scanning his sector with the systematic attention of a professional. He'd chosen his position well, good sight lines, hard cover, multiple escape routes. Under normal circumstances, approaching him would have been nearly impossible. But these weren't normal circumstances, and he wasn't expecting an attack from someone he'd dismiss as non-combatant support staff. I moved through the shadows between buildings, using every technique I'd learned in Marine reconnaissance training. The boning knife was smaller, easier to conceal, perfect for close-quarters work. I approached from his blind spot. The angle where his body armor and equipment created a visual obstruction. The knife slipped between his ribs like it was sliding through tender meat, finding the heart with the same precision I used to remove the silver skin from a beef tenderloin. He died quietly, professionally, probably never understanding that his death had come from someone he would have considered beneath his notice. 2 down, but I could hear more movement, more voices coordinating in a language I didn't recognize, but whose tactical intent was universal. They were methodically clearing the base, moving from building to building, eliminating resistance and securing objectives. Professional soldiers executing a well-planned operation. They just hadn't planned on encountering someone who could turn a kitchen into a battlefield and culinary tools into instruments of war. Someone who understood that the difference between preparing food and preparing for combat was simply a matter of what you were cutting. The real test was about to begin, because I could hear boots moving toward the mess tent, voices discussing the best approach to clear the building where they expected to find cowering support personnel. 6 more soldiers, based on the sound. Patterns, all of them about to discover that their intelligence about soft targets had been dangerously incomplete. I moved back toward my kitchen, toward the place where I'd found peace and purpose, ready to defend it with every skill I'd ever learned and every blade I'd ever sharpened. They called me just a cook, but they were about to learn that some cooks had very particular ingredients in their recipes. And tonight's special was going to be revenge, served cold and sharp enough to cut through bone. The voices grew louder as I slipped back into the mess tent through the rear entrance. 6 soldiers were approaching the main entrance, their tactical discussion carried on the wind that whipped through the camp. They were being cautious but not overly concerned, after all. They were clearing a kitchen facility staffed by support personnel. In their minds, this was routine mop-up work. I positioned myself behind the massive commercial refrigerator, its stainless steel bulk providing both concealment and protection. From here, I could see the entire dining area through the service window, could watch their entry patterns and identify their leader. The paring knife found its way into my left hand, while the chef's knife remained ready in my right. Dual wielding had been a specialty of mine back in reconnaissance, not with knives, but with the same principles of balance and timing. The first soldier through the entrance moved like point man, weapon raised, scanning corners with practiced efficiency. Behind him came 2 more, spreading to cover different angles of the dining area. Standard room clearing procedure, executed competently, but without the heightened awareness that combat veterans developed after surviving multiple engagements. These men were skilled, but they hadn't yet learned to fear the unexpected. I could have taken the point man immediately, but patience had always been my strongest asset. In reconnaissance, you learn to wait for the perfect moment, to let situations develop until every advantage was on your side. These soldiers needed to commit fully to entering my domain before I revealed myself. They needed to believe they had control. The fourth soldier entered, followed by the fifth and sixth. Their leader, a man with sergeant's insignia and the weathered face of someone who'd seen real combat, gestured for his team to spread out and search the facility systematically. He barked orders in what sounded like Serbian, his tone suggesting this was routine work, almost boring in its predictability. They had no idea they'd just walked into the workspace of someone who understood anatomy better than most surgeons, who could break down a carcass into precisely portioned cuts in minutes, who had spent years learning exactly where to place a blade for maximum effect with minimum effort. Every day in this kitchen had been training. Every meal preparation had refined skills they couldn't imagine. The point man approached the prep area where I kept my knife collection, probably planning to secure any potential weapons. His mistake was assuming that kitchen knives were tools rather than weapons, that someone who used them for cooking couldn't use them for killing. He leaned over the prep counter, presenting his neck at the perfect angle. I moved with the fluid silence of water, covering the distance between the refrigerator and prep counter in 3 silent steps. The paring knife slipped into the base of his skull with the same precision I used to core apples, severing the brainstem instantly. He collapsed forward onto the cutting board, his weapon clattering to the floor. The sound of the dropped rifle brought immediate attention from his teammates. They spun toward the prep area, but I was already moving, using the hanging pots and pans as both concealment and distraction. The chef's knife flew from my hand with the accuracy born from years of precision cutting, its weighted blade rotating once before burying itself in the throat of the second soldier. 2 down, 4 remaining. The sergeant shouted orders, his voice tight with the realization that this wasn't the easy clearing operation they'd expected. His remaining men spread out, using the dining tables for cover, but they were thinking like soldiers in a conventional battlefield. This wasn't a battlefield, this was my kitchen, and every inch of it was designed around my movements, my workflow, my understanding of space and efficiency. I grabbed the meat cleaver from its magnetic strip, its heavy blade perfectly balanced for chopping through bone and joints. The weight was familiar, comforting, even like shaking hands with an old friend. This tool had helped me portion countless roasts, had separated ribs and split chickens, had taught me exactly how much force was required to cut through different types of tissue. The third soldier made the mistake of trying to flank me through the pantry area, not realizing that I'd memorized every shelf, every container, every potential obstacle or weapon in that confined space. I met him in the narrow aisle between the flour sacks and canned goods, where his rifle became a liability rather than an asset. The cleaver split his skull like I was sectioning a melon, the blade driving deep enough to ensure he wouldn't be getting back up. The sergeant was screaming orders now, his voice carrying panic alongside anger. Whatever intelligence they'd received about this facility, it hadn't included warnings about encountering someone with my particular skill set. They'd expected kitchen staff to cower in corners, not to engage in close quarters combat with professional lethality. I rolled behind the serving counter as automatic weapons fire shredded the air where I'd been standing. The bullets sparked off stainless steel surfaces and shattered ceramic dishes, but the commercial kitchen equipment was built to withstand industrial use. These weren't thin residential appliances. They were heavy-duty machinery designed for constant punishment. The fourth soldier tried to suppress me with sustained fire while his teammate maneuvered for a better angle. Standard infantry tactics, but they were fighting someone who understood their playbook because I'd once been part of writing it. In reconnaissance, you learned every type of small unit tactics because you might need to counter them, evade them, or use them yourself depending on the mission. I pulled the pin on a smoke grenade, not military issue, but a culinary tool I used for smoking meats. The dense white smoke billowed through the tent, creating instant concealment while filling the air with the aroma of hickory and apple wood. Strange how even in combat, My mind automatically noted that the smoke would pair beautifully with the lamb I'd planned for tonight's dinner. Moving through my own smoke, I flanked the suppressing gunner from his blind side. He was focused on the area where he'd last seen me, laying down controlled bursts while his partner advanced. The boning knife slipped between his ribs from behind, angled upward to find the heart with surgical precision. He died quietly, his finger releasing the trigger as his body went limp. The advancing soldier heard his teammate's weapon stop firing and turned to check, presenting his profile at the perfect angle. I'd picked up a carving fork from the prep station, two long, sharp tines designed for holding roast steady while cutting. It found his neck with the same accuracy I used to. Test the doneness of meat, piercing the carotid artery and dropping him in seconds. 5 down, 1 remaining. The sergeant was alone now, his team eliminated by someone he'd dismissed as non-combatant support personnel. I could hear him moving through the dining area, probably trying to reach the entrance for extraction. His breathing was elevated, his movements less controlled than when he'd entered. Fear was setting in, the kind of primal terror that came from realizing you dramatically underestimated your opponent. I found him near the main entrance, crouched behind an overturned table, his rifle trained on the smoke-filled prep area, where he thought I was still hiding. From behind, he looked like any other professional soldier, competent equipment, proper fieldcraft, tactical awareness. But he'd made the fundamental mistake of assuming that cooking was incompatible with killing, that nourishment couldn't coexist with violence. "You know," I said softly, stepping out of concealment behind him, "the key to good cooking is understanding your ingredients completely. Knowing exactly how they'll respond to heat, pressure, sharp edges." He spun around, trying to bring his rifle to bear, but I was already inside his defensive perimeter. The final knife, a Japanese Suntoku blade I'd bought with my first month's pay at this base, slid into his chest with the same smooth motion I used to slice vegetables. Perfect angle, perfect depth, finding the heart with the precision that came from understanding anatomy better than most doctors. He looked at me with dying eyes, probably trying to reconcile the woman in chef's whites with the killer who'd just eliminated his entire team. I helped him to the ground gently, almost tenderly, the same way I'd learned to handle delicate ingredients that required careful attention. "The secret ingredient," I whispered as his eyes lost focus, "is experience." The kitchen fell silent, except for the distant sound of gunfire from other parts of the base. 6 more soldiers lay dead among the scattered pots and pans, their blood mixing with spilled ingredients on the floor. That would need serious cleaning before I could serve dinner tonight. I moved through the mess tent methodically, checking each body to ensure no one was feigning death, collecting their weapons and ammunition. Professional habits died hard, and intelligence gathering had always been part of reconnaissance work. Their equipment told a story: foreign manufacture, recent maintenance, coordinated radio frequencies. This wasn't random insurgent activity. This was organized, well-funded, and specifically targeted at degrading our operational capability. My hands were steady as I cleaned the knives and returned them to their proper places. Each blade needed to be washed, dried, and stored correctly to maintain their edges. Good tools deserved proper care, whether they'd been used for preparing vegetables or eliminating threats. The routine was calming, familiar, a return to the rhythms that had become my anchor after Afghanistan. The radio in the corner crackled to life with status reports from around the base. Other units were still engaged, but the tide seemed to be turning in our favor. Professional soldiers had advantages that insurgents couldn't match: training, equipment, coordination, and the kind of institutional knowledge that came from years of refined military doctrine. What they hadn't expected was for their soft targets to turn out to be anything but soft. I suspected my kitchen wasn't the only place where support personnel had surprised attacking forces today. Combat veterans didn't stop being dangerous just because they changed job classifications. We learned different skills, found different purposes, but the core training remained, waiting beneath the surface for the moment when it became necessary again. I was washing blood off the prep counter when Morrison burst through the entrance, his face pale and his rifle at the ready. He stopped short when he saw me calmly cleaning my workspace, surrounded by the bodies of 8 enemy soldiers arranged in neat rows near the wall. "Jesus Christ, Elena," he breathed, his voice barely audible. "What happened here?" I continued scrubbing the stainless steel surface, working out a particularly stubborn stain that would compromise food safety if left untreated. "They came for dinner," I said simply. I served them something they weren't expecting. Morrison stared at the bodies, then at me, then back at the bodies. His young mind was trying to process how the woman who'd been making his favorite meals for months had just single-handedly eliminated an entire enemy squad. The cognitive dissonance was understandable. Most people couldn't imagine that the same hands, capable of such care and nourishment, could also deal death with surgical precision. "Elena, who are you really?" he asked, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and fear. I looked up from my cleaning, meeting his eyes with the same calm expression I wore when explaining recipes to new kitchen staff. "I'm the person who makes sure you eat well and stay healthy," I said. "Everything else is just professional development." The base commander arrived 20 minutes later with a full security detail, their boots crunching over broken glass and scattered equipment as they surveyed the aftermath. Colonel Patricia Hayes was a career officer who'd earned her rank through competence rather than politics, and her expression as she examined the 8 bodies told me she was recalculating everything. She thought she knew about her personnel. I was back at the stove, browning lamb for the evening stew, as if nothing had happened. The meat sizzled in the cast iron Dutch oven, filling the tent with rich, savory aromas that somehow managed to overpower the metallic scent of blood that still lingered in the corners. Cooking was my meditation, my way of processing experiences that might otherwise fragment into nightmares and flashbacks. "Corporal Reyes," Colonel Hayes said, her voice carrying the carefully neutral tone officers used when they weren't sure if they were addressing a hero or a problem. "I need you to walk me through what happened here." I continued tending the lamb, adjusting the heat to ensure even browning on all sides. Proper technique was important regardless of circumstances, and these soldiers deserved a good meal after the day they'd had. 8 hostile personnel attempted to secure the mess facility. I defended it using available resources. Colonel Hayes gestured at the bodies. Available resources being kitchen knives. Kitchen knives, salt, smoke, superior knowledge of the terrain, and 22 years of experience that began long before I started cooking professionally. I added onions to the pot, their sharp aroma mixing with the browning meat. They made assumptions about support personnel that proved incorrect. The colonel exchanged glances with her aide, a young lieutenant who kept staring at the scene like he was trying to solve a particularly complex puzzle. "Corporal, your service record indicates you've been assigned to food service for the past 2 years. Before that, you were listed as medical discharge from active marine reconnaissance." I seasoned the lamb with herbs I'd grown in a small garden behind the mess tent. Rosemary, thyme, oregano, simple flavors that reminded me of home, of the ranch in New Mexico where I'd learned to hunt and cook from my grandmother. She'd taught me that taking life meant you owed respect to what you'd killed, whether it was a deer in the mountains or an enemy soldier in your kitchen. "Medical discharge doesn't mean medical inability, ma'am. It means the Corps decided my PTSD made me unsuitable for forward reconnaissance duties." I stirred the pot, ensuring the meat didn't stick to the bottom. They were probably right. After Kandahar, I had trouble distinguishing between threats and non-threats in civilian environments. Cooking helped with that. The lieutenant spoke up, consulting his tablet. "Ma'am, I'm showing Corporal Reyes had the highest marksmanship scores in her reconnaissance training class. Qualified expert with 15 different weapon systems. decorated for actions during Operation Desert Scorpion. Colonel Hayes studied me with renewed attention. "What happened in Kandahar, Corporal?" I added carrots and potatoes to the stew, checking the liquid levels and adjusting the seasoning. This conversation was inevitable, had been since the moment I'd picked up that first knife. For 2 years, I'd managed to keep my past compartmentalized, to be just the cook who made sure everyone ate well. But compartments had a way of breaking down under pressure. IED took out my reconnaissance team during a night patrol. I was point, should have detected the device, should have kept my Marines alive. The words came out flat, emotionless, the way I'd practiced saying them to military psychiatrists. Spent 3 months in Walter Reed, another 6 months trying to convince the Corps I was still mission ready. They disagreed. I could feel Morrison watching from the entrance where he'd been standing guard. He'd probably never heard me talk about anything more personal than recipe modifications. Had never imagined that his friendly neighborhood cook carried the kind of weight that broke some people completely. "So you became a cook, Colonel Hayes." Observed. I became someone who created instead of destroyed. Someone who nourished instead of eliminated. Someone who could sleep at night without seeing dead faces. I lifted the pot lid, checking the consistency of the stew. Almost ready. But it needed another 10 minutes for the flavors to properly meld. It worked for 2 years. The colonel moved closer, lowering her voice. And today? I met her eyes directly, seeing recognition there. She was career military, had probably made her own difficult choices about violence and necessity. Today, I remembered that some people mistake kindness for weakness, mistake healing for helplessness. Today I reminded them that Marines don't stop being Marines just because they change jobs. The security team was removing the bodies, working with the clinical efficiency of people who'd done this before. I made a mental note to deep clean the entire facility before serving dinner. Bloodborne pathogens were serious business in food service, and I maintained the same standards for hygiene whether I was dealing with raw chicken or enemy casualties. "Corporal, I'm going to need detailed after-action reports, witness statements, and a psychological evaluation." Colonel Hayes paused, watching me add final seasonings to the stew. "I'm also going to need you to consider a transfer back to active combat duties." I ladled a small portion into a tasting spoon, checking the flavor balance. Perfect, rich, complex, satisfying. This would help the soldiers process today's stress, would give them something warm and comforting to anchor them to normal life. Food was medicine in ways that went beyond mere nutrition. "With respect, ma'am, I'm exactly where I need to be. These soldiers depend on me to keep them fed and healthy. Today proved I can protect them as well as nourish them." I replaced the pot lid, satisfied with my work. Besides, someone needs to finish preparing dinner. Colonel Hayes smiled for the first time since arriving. "Understood, Corporal. But your job classification is going to change. You'll remain head of food services, but you're also being designated as base security specialist. Enhanced weapons authorization, combat pay, and formal recognition that this facility has defensive capabilities beyond standard protocols." Morrison stepped forward, his young face serious. "Ma'am, what about the other soldiers? Word's going to spread about what Elena did here. Some people might not understand." The colonel looked around the mess tent, taking in the restored order. The absence of any sign that 8 people had died here less than an hour ago. The rich aroma of dinner preparation continuing despite everything that had happened. "Son, what happened here today is going to become legend. The cook who eliminated an entire enemy squad with kitchen knives while preparing the evening meal." I started setting up the serving line, arranging plates and utensils with the same precision I'd used to eliminate threats. Routine was important, especially after traumatic events. The soldiers needed to see that life continued, that the systems they depended on remained functional despite attempted disruption. "The question isn't whether people will understand," I said. filling large serving containers with the finished stew. The question is whether they'll remember that support personnel aren't necessarily soft targets, that people who dedicate their lives to caring for others can also defend them when necessary. 3 hours later, I served dinner to 300 soldiers who looked at me with expressions ranging from awe to wariness to gratitude. Word had indeed spread, had grown in the telling until some versions had me taking down 20 enemy soldiers with a single carving knife. Military folklore worked that way. Reality became legend. Legend became inspiration. What mattered was that they ate well, that the lamb stew provided the protein and comfort they needed after a difficult day. What mattered was that tomorrow morning I'd be back in this kitchen at 0400, starting the bread and coffee that would fuel another day of their service. What mattered was that they knew someone was watching over them, someone who understood that caring for people sometimes meant more than just cooking their meals. Private Morrison approached my serving station, his tray extended and his expression thoughtful. "Elena, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you think you'll ever go back to being just a cook?" I served him an extra portion of stew, the way I always did, and met his eyes with the same calm expression I'd worn while eliminating his enemies. "Morrison, I was never just a cook. I was always exactly what these soldiers needed me to be." As the evening wound down and the last soldier finished eating, I began the familiar routine of cleaning and preparation for tomorrow's meals. Knives went back to their proper places, cleaned and sharpened, and ready for whatever tasks awaited them. The kitchen returned to its peaceful order, a place of creation and nourishment and quiet satisfaction. But now everyone knew what else it could be when necessary. Now everyone understood that the woman who made sure they ate well would also make sure they stayed alive. In the end, both were just different expressions of the same fundamental commitment. I was Elena Reyes, head cook of Forward Operating Base Sentinel. I fed my people, I protected my people, and I slept peacefully knowing I'd done both jobs exactly as well as they deserved. 3 weeks after what the soldiers had started calling the kitchen incident, I stood in my garden behind the mess tent, harvesting tomatoes in the early morning light. The plants had flourished despite the mountain climate, their red fruit heavy and perfect for the caprese salad I planned to serve with tonight's chicken parmesan. My hands moved with practiced efficiency, selecting only the ripest specimens while leaving others to mature for future meals. The garden had become my sanctuary within a sanctuary, a place where I could nurture growth instead of dealing death. The irony wasn't lost on me that both activities required intimate knowledge of anatomy, plant or human. The principles of where to cut and how deep remained remarkably similar. But here among the herbs and vegetables, cutting meant harvest rather than harm, meant feeding rather than fighting. "Morning, Elena." The voice belonged to Master Sergeant Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran who'd initially been skeptical of having a former Marine running the kitchen. His opinion had shifted dramatically after witnessing the aftermath of my encounter with the enemy squad. Now he stopped by most mornings to help with the garden, claiming the work reminded him of his grandmother's farm in Texas. "Morning, Sergeant. The basil's ready for harvesting if you want to help." I handed him a pair of kitchen shears, noting how he handled them with the same respect he'd show any weapon. Everyone on base had developed a new appreciation for kitchen tools since that day, understanding finally that in the right hands, anything could become lethal. We worked in comfortable silence, gathering herbs that would transform tonight's simple meal into something memorable. Rodriguez had proven surprisingly knowledgeable about gardening, sharing techniques he'd learned during childhood summers spent helping his grandmother tend her extensive vegetable plots. These quiet conversations had become precious to me, moments of normalcy that anchored me to the peaceful aspects of my current life. "Elena, can I ask you something that's been bothering me?" Rodriguez straightened up, wiping soil from his hands on a towel I'd provided for that purpose. "Always. Do you ever miss it? The reconnaissance work, the missions, being out there, where the action was." His question carried genuine curiosity rather than judgment. the way military personnel often probed each other's career decisions. I considered the question while continuing to harvest tomatoes, thinking about the adrenaline rush of successful missions, the satisfaction of completing objectives that no one else could handle, the intense camaraderie that came from shared danger and mutual dependence. Those experiences had defined me for years, had shaped my understanding of purpose and competence and self-worth. "I miss the clarity," I said finally. "In reconnaissance, you always knew exactly what success looked like. Complete the mission. Bring everyone home. Gather the intelligence. Eliminate the threat. Simple objectives with measurable outcomes." Rodriguez nodded, understanding the appeal of unambiguous goals in a world that rarely provided them. "And now? Now success is more complex. Did the soldiers enjoy their meal? Did they get proper nutrition to maintain peak performance? Did I create an environment that helped them process stress and maintain morale?" I selected another perfect tomato, adding it to the growing collection in my basket. The feedback loops are longer, the results harder to quantify. We moved to the herb section, where the rosemary and thyme had grown thick and fragrant in the mountain air. I'd learned to grow these plants from my grandmother, who'd maintained an extensive herb garden on our family ranch. She'd taught me that cooking was just another form of medicine, that the right combinations of flavors and nutrients could heal bodies and spirits in ways that went far beyond simple sustenance. "But you don't regret the career change?" Rodriguez pressed, clearly working through his own questions about purpose and identity in military service. "I regret the circumstances that made it necessary. I regret losing my team in Kandahar, regret the nightmares that made me unsuitable for continued reconnaissance duties, regret spending 2 years believing I was somehow broken or diminished." I paused in my harvesting, meeting his eyes directly. "But I don't regret finding a different way to serve, a different way to matter." The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted our conversation. Colonel Hayes appeared around the corner of the mess tent, accompanied by a man in civilian clothes whose bearing and alertness immediately identified him as intelligence services. My hand instinctively moved toward the paring knife on my belt before I caught myself and forced it back to the tomato I'd been examining. "Corporal Reyes, we need to discuss a development that affects your situation here." The colonel's tone was carefully neutral, but I could read tension in her posture that suggested this conversation would be significant. Rodriguez excused himself, understanding that command-level discussions weren't his business, but not before giving me a look that conveyed both support and concern. The civilian waited until the sergeant was out of earshot before introducing himself. "Corporal, I'm Agent Davidson from Defense Intelligence. We've been analyzing the enemy soldiers you encountered 3 weeks ago, and we've uncovered some troubling information." He pulled out a tablet, showing me photographs of the dead soldiers along with detailed intelligence assessments. I continued harvesting herbs while listening, finding that keeping my hands busy helped maintain the calm focus I'd need for whatever revelation was coming. The basil was particularly fragrant this morning, its sharp green scent mixing with the mountain air to create an almost perfect sensory experience. "These weren't random insurgents or local militias," Agent Davidson continued. "They were part of a specialized unit trained specifically to target Western military support infrastructure. Kitchens, medical facilities, communication centers, anything that maintains operational capability without directly engaging in combat." Colonel Hayes added, "Intelligence indicates this unit has been responsible for attacks on similar facilities across 3 different countries. They've killed 47 support personnel in the past 18 months. I felt the familiar cold settling in my stomach, the same sensation I'd experienced before every dangerous mission during my reconnaissance days. And now they know one of their target facilities fought back successfully. Exactly. Intercepted. Communication suggests they're treating your actions as a significant intelligence failure. They're reassessing their operational assumptions about Western support personnel. Agent Davidson swiped to a new screen showing communication intercepts and analysis. More importantly, they're planning a response. The implications were immediately clear. My decision to defend the mess tent hadn't just saved lives in the immediate moment. It had potentially disrupted an entire operational strategy based on the assumption that support personnel were soft targets. But that disruption would also draw attention, would make me and facilities like mine priority targets for retaliation. What kind of response? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. They're sending specialists. People trained specifically to eliminate targets who've proven more dangerous than anticipated. Colonel Hayes met my eyes with the kind of direct communication that senior officers used when delivering unpleasant truths. Elena, they're sending people to kill you specifically. I added the harvested herbs to my basket, noting that I had enough rosemary for the week's menu planning, but would need to harvest more time tomorrow. Routine tasks helped maintain perspective during crisis situations, helped prevent the kind of emotional spiraling that could compromise decision-making ability. How many specialists and what's their timeline? The questions came automatically, falling back into the analytical mindset that had made me effective in reconnaissance. Threat assessment was the same regardless of whether you were planning a mission or defending a kitchen. Agent Davidson consulted his tablet. Best intelligence suggests a 3-person team with arrival estimated within the next 10 days. These aren't line soldiers or local recruits. They're professionals with extensive training in eliminating hardened targets. I considered this information while examining a particularly perfect sprig of oregano. 3 professionals meant careful planning, coordinated approaches, and backup contingencies if initial attempts failed. They would study my patterns, identify my vulnerabilities, and probably attempt to eliminate me in circumstances where my kitchen advantages would be minimized. Recommendations? I asked. Colonel Hayes and Agent Davidson exchanged glances before the colonel answered. Transfer to a secure facility stateside. Full protection detail, new identity if necessary. We can't risk losing someone with your capabilities, and we can't risk the morale impact if they succeed in killing you. The suggestion made tactical sense from their perspective, but it ignored the fundamental reality of my situation. These soldiers depended on me not just for meals, but for the stability and normalcy that my presence represented. Abandoning them because of personal threats would undermine everything I'd worked to build, would confirm the enemy's strategy of targeting support personnel to degrade operational effectiveness. Negative, I said, continuing to examine herbs with apparent calm. Running away validates their operational theory that support personnel will abandon their posts when threatened. It proves they can disrupt our capabilities by targeting non-combat roles. Agent Davidson frowned. Corporal, these are professional killers coming specifically for you. This isn't about proving points or maintaining morale. This is about keeping you alive. I looked up from my gardening, meeting both officers' eyes with the steady gaze I'd perfected during years of briefing senior commanders on reconnaissance findings. Agent Davidson. 3 weeks ago, I eliminated 8 professional soldiers using kitchen knives and superior knowledge of the terrain. I'm not the same soft target they initially assessed. Colonel Hayes studied me carefully. What are you proposing? I'm proposing we let them come. I'm proposing we demonstrate conclusively that targeting support personnel isn't the easy victory they've been counting on. I stood up, brushing soil from my hands. I'm proposing we teach them that some cooks bite back. The morning sun was climbing higher, signaling that breakfast preparation needed to begin soon. 300 soldiers would be expecting hot food and fresh coffee in less than 2 hours. And that schedule was more important to me than 3 incoming assassins who'd mistaken my kitchen apron for a white flag of surrender. Besides, I added, shouldering my basket of fresh vegetables, I've got a menu to plan and meals to prepare. Professional killers will just have to wait their turn. The attack came at 0347 hours. During the quiet period between night watch changes when alertness naturally dipped and shadows provided maximum concealment. I'd been expecting it for 9 days, had prepared for every contingency I could imagine. But the professionals who came for me were better than I'd anticipated. The first sign was the absence of sound from the perimeter guard post nearest the kitchen. Sergeant Williams should have been conducting his routine radio check, but the frequencies remained silent. That told me they'd eliminated at least one sentry, probably more, and were moving with the kind of coordinated precision that marked elite operators. I rolled silently from my cot in the small room behind the kitchen, my hand finding the knife I kept under my pillow. Not a kitchen blade this time, but a marine kabar that had belonged to my squad leader in Kandahar, a weapon designed specifically for close-quarters killing. My feet found the floor without making a sound, muscle memory guiding me through movements. I'd practiced obsessively since learning about the incoming threat. The kitchen was dark, illuminated only by the red glow of equipment status lights and the faint starlight filtering through the tent fabric. But this was my territory, every inch as familiar as my own heartbeat. I knew which floorboards creaked, which equipment hummed loudly enough to mask movement, which shadows offered concealment, and which were deceptive traps. They came through 3 different entry points simultaneously, a coordinated breach that would have overwhelmed any normal target. The main entrance, the rear supply door, and a slice through the tent wall near the prep area. Professional work executed with military precision. Exactly what I'd expected from people trained to eliminate hardened targets. The first assassin through the main entrance moved like liquid shadow, his night vision equipment sweeping the dining area while his suppressed weapon remained ready for instant engagement. He was good, better than the soldiers I'd faced before. But he made the same fundamental mistake they all made. He assumed the kitchen was just a room instead of recognizing it as a weapons cache disguised as a food preparation facility. I'd spent the past 9 days turning my workspace into a tactical environment. Every knife had been repositioned for optimal access during combat. Every pot and pan had been evaluated for its potential as a weapon or shield. Every ingredient had been assessed for its utility in creating obstacles, distractions, or improvised weapons. What looked like a normal kitchen was actually a carefully prepared killing ground. The assassin near the prep area triggered my first surprise. A thin wire stretched across the pathway that activated a cascading collapse of hanging pots and pans. The noise was tremendous, designed to mask my movement while creating confusion and disorientation. He reacted professionally, rolling away from the falling metal and bringing his weapon to bear on where he expected me to emerge from concealment. Instead, I came from above, dropping from the equipment rack where I'd been waiting since 0300 hours. The Kabar found the gap between his helmet and body armor, severing the spinal cord with surgical precision. He dropped instantly, his suppressed rifle clattering against the prep counter where I'd prepared thousands of meals over the past 2 years. The second assassin was already moving toward my position, having triangulated the source of the disturbance with professional accuracy. But he was thinking like a soldier in a conventional battlefield, not like someone facing an opponent who understood that cooking and killing used many of the same principles. I'd prepared a special surprise for him. The industrial-grade pepper. I'd modified contained military-grade irritant powder mixed with ground ghost peppers, the hottest chilies I could source. The compressed air delivery system I'd jury-rigged from kitchen equipment created a cloud of burning agony that filled his night vision with tears and sent him stumbling blindly through the dining area. While he was temporarily incapacitated, I moved with the fluid silence that had made me an elite reconnaissance Marine. The meat tenderizer mallet I'd selected weighed exactly 12 ounces, perfectly balanced for precision strikes. It connected with his temple with the same controlled force I used to flatten chicken breasts, rendering him unconscious before he could clear his vision enough to engage. The third assassin was the leader, the most dangerous of the group. He'd hung back during the initial breach, observing his teammates' elimination with professional detachment while calculating new approaches. I could sense him moving through the shadows near the supply area, patient and methodical, waiting for me to reveal my position through movement or sound. This was the moment I'd been preparing for, the ultimate test of everything I'd learned about combining my culinary expertise with my military training. I needed to draw him into engagement while maintaining every possible advantage, needed to prove conclusively that underestimating support personnel was a fatal mistake. I began cooking. The portable burner I'd positioned near the supply area flared to life, illuminating my silhouette as I began preparing what appeared to be a late-night snack. To any observer, I looked vulnerable, distracted, completely focused on the simple task of heating oil in a cast-iron skillet. The perfect target for a professional assassin who specialized in eliminating people when they least expected it. He took the bait, moving with expert stealth toward my position while I continued the charade of cooking. The oil in the skillet was heating to precisely 375 degrees Fahrenheit, the optimal temperature for deep frying that would also cause devastating burns if weaponized properly. I was counting seconds, timing his approach against the temperature gauge I could monitor through peripheral vision. When he was close enough that missing would be impossible, I spun and hurled the contents of the skillet directly at his position. Superheated oil filled the air between us, forcing him to choose between maintaining his attack angle and protecting himself from third-degree burns. He chose self-preservation, throwing himself sideways while his suppressed rifle tracked toward where I'd been standing. But I was already moving, using the moment of his defensive reaction to close the distance between us. The cleaver I'd selected for this encounter was my heaviest, a 3-pound butcher's tool designed for chopping through bone and joints. It whistled through the air with lethal accuracy, but he was good enough to partially deflect it with his rifle barrel. The impact sent both our weapons spinning away into the darkness, leaving us to settle this with hands and improvised tools. He was larger than me, probably stronger, with training that matched my own and fewer psychological scars to interfere with his performance. Under normal circumstances, he would have significant advantages in close-quarters combat. But these weren't normal circumstances. This was my kitchen, my territory, my rules. He lunged toward me with a combat knife drawn from his tactical vest, but I was already reaching for the wire whisk I'd positioned precisely for this scenario. 24 inches of aircraft-grade aluminum with 12 stainless steel wires that could entangle, blind, or puncture with equal effectiveness. I caught his knife hand in the wire loops, twisting with a motion identical to beating egg whites, disarming him while opening deep lacerations across his wrist and forearm. His backup weapon was a tactical tomahawk, a brutal close-quarters tool that could split skulls or sever limbs with devastating efficiency. But as he drew it from his belt, my hand closed around the handle of my pasta machine, a 15-pound Italian-made device with steel rollers and gears that could crush bones as easily as it flattened dough. The impact when it connected with his skull was wet and final, the same sound as tenderizing tough meat, but with permanent consequences. He collapsed beside the prep counter where I'd taught Morrison how to dice onions without crying, his blood mixing with flour that had spilled during our struggle. The kitchen fell silent except for the gentle hum of refrigeration equipment and the distant sound of footsteps as the cavalry arrived. Colonel Hayes burst through the main entrance with a full security team, their weapons drawn and night vision active, ready to find my body among the wreckage of what they'd expected to be a hopeless fight. Instead, they found me calmly cleaning. Blood off my equipment, 3 dead assassins arranged in neat rows near the wall, and the mess tent restored to functional order despite the violence that had just concluded. I was washing the pasta machine in the industrial sink, removing biological debris with the same methodical attention I gave to normal food safety protocols. "Elena," Colonel Hayes said, her voice carrying amazement mixed with something that might have been awe. "Are you injured?" I dried the pasta machine with a clean towel, inspecting it for damage that might affect its future culinary performance. "Negative, ma'am. No injuries, no equipment damage, no disruption to tomorrow's meal schedule." I returned the device to its proper storage location, though I'll need to requisition replacement pepper and cooking oil. The security team was examining the bodies with professional interest, noting the precision of the kills and the improvised weapons that had proven so effective. Morrison appeared in the doorway, his face pale but his expression showing pride rather than fear as he surveyed the aftermath of my defensive action. "Ma'am," one of the security specialists reported, "these aren't local insurgents. Equipment, training, tactics. These are Tier 1 operators from a foreign special operations unit." Colonel Hayes looked from the bodies to me, understanding the full implications of what had just occurred. "Elena, you've just eliminated some of the most dangerous people in this theater of operations, using kitchen equipment." I was already beginning preparation for tomorrow's breakfast, checking supplies and planning the menu adjustments needed to accommodate the increased caloric needs that would follow tonight's excitement. Combat operations always increased appetite, and proper nutrition would be crucial for maintaining peak performance during whatever retaliation might follow. "Ma'am, they made the same mistake everyone makes. They assumed that because I chose to cook instead of kill, I'd forgotten how to do both." I cracked eggs into a mixing bowl, preparing the batter for tomorrow's pancakes. They thought feeding people made me weak instead of recognizing that protecting people made me stronger. The intelligence value of capturing enemy special operations personnel alive would have been significant, but dead enemies told their own stories. Equipment, weapons, communication devices, all of it would provide insights into the organization that had been systematically targeting Western support personnel throughout the region. More importantly, word of tonight's action would spread through military networks and enemy communications alike. The message would be clear: support personnel weren't soft targets anymore. Kitchens, medical facilities, and communication centers couldn't be attacked without expecting lethal resistance from people who'd been dramatically underestimated. Colonel Hayes approached the prep area where I was working, watching me measure flour with the same precision I'd used to eliminate professional killers minutes earlier. "Elena, what you've accomplished here goes beyond personal defense. You've potentially changed how enemies view our entire support infrastructure." I whisked the pancake batter with long, smooth strokes that incorporated air while avoiding overdevelopment of the gluten structure. Perfect pancakes required the same attention to technique and timing as perfect combat operations, the same understanding that excellence came from mastering fundamentals rather than relying on improvisation. "Ma'am, I didn't set out to change anything strategic. I just wanted to protect my soldiers and serve good food." I covered the batter and placed it in the refrigerator to rest overnight. Everything else was just professional development. Agent Davidson arrived with additional intelligence personnel, their faces showing the kind of grim satisfaction that came from eliminating high-priority targets. They immediately began photographing and cataloging the scene, understanding that tonight's action represented a significant intelligence coup. "Corporal Reyes," Agent Davidson said, "preliminary assessment suggests these were the same operators, responsible for killing 47 support personnel across 3 countries. You've just eliminated an entire specialist cell." I nodded while continuing my prep work for tomorrow's meals. Those 47 deaths had been weighing on my mind since learning about them. 47 people who'd been targeted simply for keeping military operations functional. Tonight had been about more than personal survival. It had been about justice for people who died doing jobs similar to mine. As the various officials completed their documentation and removed the bodies, I found myself alone in my kitchen once again. The familiar space looked exactly as it had before the attack. Every piece of equipment clean and properly stored. Every surface sanitized and ready for tomorrow's meal preparation. But something fundamental had changed, not in the kitchen, but in my understanding of my role here. For 2 years, I'd seen cooking as an escape from my military identity, a way to serve without fighting, to matter without killing. Tonight had proven that both identities could coexist, that caring for people and protecting them weren't contradictory missions, but complementary aspects of the same fundamental commitment. I was Elena Reyes, former Marine reconnaissance specialist, current head cook of Forward Operating Base Sentinel, and apparently the woman who just redefined what it meant to be support personnel in a combat zone. Tomorrow I'd serve pancakes to 300 soldiers who depended on me for more than just nutrition, who understood finally that their cook was also their guardian. The enemy had called me just a cook, had dismissed me as a soft target, had sent their best killers to eliminate someone they saw as weak and helpless. They'd discovered too late that some cooks had very sharp knives and excellent knowledge of anatomy, that some support personnel had forgotten nothing about warfare, while learning everything about caring for others. I was exactly what these soldiers needed me to be, someone who could feed them and fight for them, who could create and destroy with equal skill, who could serve pancakes in the morning after serving justice in the night. The kitchen was quiet, now peaceful and ready for another day of nourishing the people who defended freedom. And if anyone else wanted to test whether cooks made easy targets, well, they were welcome to try. I'd be ready with fresh ingredients and sharp knives, prepared to demonstrate once again that underestimating support personnel was a recipe for disaster. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.